People often think wisdom arrives like a prize at the end of the road, that if you live long enough, you're finally handed answers, neat, comforting, complete. But that isn't how it happens. Not really. What comes with age isn't a stack of answers. It's a quiet unraveling of the questions you once thought mattered so much. When I was younger, I believed life was something you figured out by doing more, striving harder, holding tighter, proving yourself again and again. I thought peace would come once things finally lined up, once people understood me, once I became enough. But somewhere along the way, usually after a few losses you never fully recover from, something shifts. You begin to notice that the people who seem most at ease aren't the ones who won. They're the ones who stopped fighting battles that never truly belonged to them. That's the part no one tells you. Age doesn't teach you how to control life better. It teaches you how little control you ever had, and how freeing that realization can be. You start seeing how much energy was spent chasing approval, replaying old conversations, trying to fix what was already gone. And one day, almost without drama, you realize, oh, so that's how it really is. Life wasn't asking to be conquered, it was asking to be listened to. And the older you get, the clearer it becomes. Not everything deserves your grip. Some things soften only when you loosen your hand. That understanding doesn't arrive loudly. It arrives quietly, like truth often does. For most of our lives, we misunderstand what happiness is asking of us. We think it's something to be built, piece by piece, through effort, achievement, and endurance. We believe if we just hold on long enough, push a little harder, stay loyal to every version of ourselves we've ever been, life will eventually reward us with peace. But happiness doesn't seem to work that way, not in the long run. What time reveals, gently, sometimes painfully, is that much of our suffering comes not from what happens to us, but from what we refuse to release. Old roles, old expectations, old wounds that once protected us, but now quietly drain us. Aging is often spoken of as loss of strength, speed, certainty. But there's another side to it, one that doesn't get much attention. With age, the cost of holding on becomes clearer. You feel it in your body when resentment lingers too long. You hear it in your thoughts when old regrets keep repeating themselves, long after they've stopped being useful. You sense it when peace is available, but something inside won't let you rest. Letting go isn't giving up on life. It's finally understanding what life was never asking you to carry. Younger years are about accumulation, of dreams, identities, ambitions. Older years, when lived honestly, are about discernment, about choosing what truly belongs inside you, and what doesn't anymore. This shift doesn't happen all at once. It happens in small, human moments, and within those moments live a few quiet rules, not written anywhere, rarely spoken out loud, that older souls tend to live by, often without realizing it. And it's there, in those lived truths, that the deeper story begins. Section 1. The need to be understood. There was a time when being misunderstood felt unbearable. You would replay conversations in your mind, thinking of better words, clearer explanations, one more chance to say what you really meant. You wanted people to see your intentions, your effort, your heart. You believed that if they truly understood you, the tension would dissolve, the distance would close, the ache would finally quiet down. It makes sense. Being seen is a deeply human longing. But life has a way of teaching this lesson slowly. You notice that no matter how carefully you explain yourself, some people will still hear what they are ready to hear, not what you are trying to say. Their listening is shaped by their own fears, memories, and unfinished stories, and none of that is something you can fix. At first, this realization stings. It feels like resignation. Then, unexpectedly, it feels like relief. You begin to understand that constantly seeking to be understood is a heavy burden to carry. It keeps you alert, guarded, rehearsing, never quite at rest. And one day, perhaps, after saying far less than you used to, you notice how peaceful silence can be. Not everyone needs to understand you for your life to be valid. Not every misunderstanding needs correction. Inner peace arrives when you stop auditioning for clarity in other people's minds, when you let your actions speak quietly, and allow others the freedom to misunderstand if they must. There is a deep calm in realizing this. Your worth was never dependent on being fully understood. Section 2. The urge to win every battle when you're younger. Every disagreement feels like a crossroads. A wrong must be corrected. A point must be proven. Silence feels like defeat. You gather facts in your mind, sharpen your words, rehearse your logic, not always to understand, but to prevail. And for a while, it feels necessary. Like standing your ground is the same as standing up for yourself. But over time, a quieter question begins to surface. What is this costing me? You start noticing how some arguments linger long after they end, how your body stays tense, your sleep unsettled, your thoughts looping back to words already spoken. Even when you win, something inside feels strangely tired. Then comes a moment, often an ordinary one, where you choose not to respond, not because you have nothing to say, but because you sense the weight of saying it, and nothing falls apart. The world doesn't collapse because you let a remark pass. Your dignity doesn't disappear because you didn't defend every angle. In fact, something unexpected happens. Space opens up, breath returns. You realize that not every battle is a threat to your identity. Some are simply invitations to exhaustion, and the deepest strength isn't in always standing firm. It's in knowing when firmness is no longer necessary. Peace begins when you stop treating every difference as a duel, when you allow yourself to walk away, not in weakness, but in wisdom. There is freedom in choosing calm over conquest, and with time, that freedom starts to feel like home. Section 3. The weight of old regrets. Regret has a quiet way of following us. It doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers late at night. When the house is still and there's nothing left to distract you, it reminds you of choices that might have turned out differently, words you wish you'd said or hadn't, roads not taken, people you loved but couldn't keep. For a long time, regret feels like responsibility, like if you replay it enough, you'll somehow redeem it. But replaying doesn't change the past. It only keeps you living there. As the years pass, something becomes clear. The person who made those choices no longer exists in the same way. They were doing the best they could with what they knew, with the tools they had, with the wounds they hadn't yet learned how to name. Holding today's wisdom against yesterday's self is an unfair trial. There comes a moment, often after loss, illness, or simply watching time move on, when you feel the heaviness of carrying all those old versions of yourself, and you begin to see that regret, when held too tightly, doesn't honor the past. It obscures the present. Letting go doesn't mean saying those choices didn't matter. It means allowing them to belong to their time. Peace begins when you stop asking your past to explain itself to your present, when you allow compassion to replace judgment, especially toward yourself. There is a quiet dignity in saying, I survived that, I learned, and I am still here. Section 4. The need to be needed. For many years, being needed feels like proof of value. You're the one people call in a crisis, the one who holds things together, the one who gives advice, fixes problems, remembers birthdays, carries responsibility quietly without asking for much in return. It feels good, meaningful even, to be essential, until it starts to feel heavy. You notice how rarely you rest without guilt, how saying yes has become automatic, even when your energy is thin, how your own needs wait patiently at the back of the line, year after year, and then slowly, life rearranges things. Children grow, roles change, people learn to manage without you, not out of rejection, but out of evolution. At first, that shift can feel like erasure, like you're being gently pushed to the margins of your own story. But there is another way to see it. Being needed is not the same as being loved, and love does not require constant usefulness. With time, you begin to sense the freedom in no longer being responsible for everyone's balance. You discover there is a version of you that exists beyond service, one that can sit, observe, breathe, and simply be. Inner peace arrives when you allow others to carry their own weight. When you stop measuring your worth by how indispensable you are, there is quiet grace in stepping back without bitterness, in realizing that your presence alone, unproving, unfixing, is enough. Section 5. The fear of running out of time. When you're younger, time feels distant, almost generous. There's always later, another chance, another chapter waiting just beyond the horizon. Life stretches forward, wide and forgiving. Mistakes feel temporary because the future feels endless. Then one day, without ceremony, time feels closer, not in a frightening way at first, just clearer. You notice how quickly seasons pass. How names you once spoke daily are now memories. How someday has quietly turned into now or never. At first, this awareness can feel unsettling, like a clock you can't stop hearing. But with age, something softer emerges. You realize that urgency isn't the enemy, distraction is. When time felt endless, it was easy to postpone what mattered, to tolerate what drained you, to wait for the right moment to speak honestly, love fully, or let go of what no longer fit. Now, with time more visible, choices become simpler. You stop saving your truth for later. You stop delaying rest. You stop pretending certain relationships will change on their own. Peace arrives not from fearing the limited nature of time, but from respecting it, from living in a way that doesn't require constant postponement. There is freedom in no longer racing the clock, and no longer ignoring it either, just walking beside it, attentive and awake. Time was never something to outrun. It was something to listen to. When you look back, it's rarely the crowded moments that stand out. It's the quieter ones, the pauses between events, the spaces where nothing needed to be proven. What all these realizations slowly point toward is something disarmingly simple. Life becomes lighter when we stop carrying what was never meant to be permanent. When you no longer need to be understood, arguments lose their urgency. When winning no longer defines you, silence feels safer. When regrets are allowed to rest in the past, the present opens up. When usefulness stops being your measure, your existence softens. When time is respected rather than feared, each moment feels more complete. None of this happens by adding something new to yourself. It happens by subtracting, gently, wisely. Peace doesn't come from having more clarity, more certainty, more control. It comes from releasing the illusion that those things were ever guaranteed, from trusting that what remains after letting go is not emptiness, but truth. Life, when stripped of excess struggle, reveals a quieter rhythm, one that doesn't rush, one that doesn't demand constant explanation, one that allows you to sit with yourself without judgment. There is a kind of freedom that arrives only when striving loosens its grip. When you realize you don't have to carry every memory forward to honor it. You don't have to fight every battle to respect yourself. In that stillness, something settles, not resignation, acceptance. And within that acceptance, a deep, unshakable calm begins to breathe. If life has been quietly teaching you anything, perhaps it's this. What if peace was never something to achieve, but something you remember once enough weight falls away? What if the parts of you that feel tired are not broken, just overburdened, carrying stories, expectations, and roles that once mattered, but no longer need to be held so tightly? As you sit with everything you've lived through, the love that stayed, the love that left, the versions of yourself that came and went, what do you feel is asking to be released now? Not out of bitterness, not out of defeat, but out of respect for the life you still inhabit, What conversations no longer need replaying? What explanations no longer need offering? What urgency can finally soften into presence? There is no final lesson here, no finish line, only a gentle noticing, a noticing of what feels lighter when you don't insist, of how quiet can become kind, of how much of life remains, not in years perhaps, but in depth. And maybe the most important question of all is not how much time is left, but how honestly it can be lived. What would change if you trusted that you've already done enough? If you allowed yourself to rest inside the life you've earned? These aren't questions that demand answers. They're the kind that simply walk beside you, long after the words fade.